determine who's the good guy here and here's the evil. And by the way, I'm
You're
not
the
even a big
bad
fan.
guys, for God's sake.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's my point.
You're
If
the
you
bad
actually
guys.
think that we're the bad guys and the Iranians the good guys, you have a personality
listen,
disorder, my
guys,
friend.
I'm sorry.
And it really is amazing that you think that we're the villains here and that this is a regime. And by the way, again, I wasn't even necessarily in favor of this incursion in the first place. But come on, this is a regime that was killing thousands, murdering their own people. This was a regime that's building a nuclear weapon. So how are we the bad guys by trying to save lives? And I do think, I think to Trump's credit, he really did.
The mask hasn't just slipped, it has been completely ripped off. Right-wing billionaire whisperer and Trump economic sycophant Stephen Moore just went on live television and told the world that if you don't support Donald Trump dragging the West into a catastrophic, bloody ground invasion of Iran, you have a personality disorder. Let that sink in. This is the exact same corporate billionaire-backed elite that promised us mission accomplished in Iraq and a 2-week walkover in Afghanistan, now demanding that working-class sons and daughters be shipped off to a slaughter in the Middle East to feed Donald Trump's fragile ego and Netanyahu's geopolitical ambitions. But across the panel stood economist Steve Keen and Professor Jiang, completely dismantling the dangerous Hollywood script propaganda of the far-right war machine. They exposed the terrifying reality, from Trump's heavy-handed ultimatums to the chilling setup of a Gulf of Tonkin-style false flag in the Strait of Hormuz. The American military machine is being walked into a trap against a nation of 90 million people. What's at stake here isn't just global economic stability or skyrocketing prices for working families at the pump. It is the lives of ordinary soldiers and civilians being sacrificed on the altar of authoritarian populism and billionaire-funded distraction. If you are new here, take a second to subscribe. It really helps the channel. I'll give you my thoughts at the end after the clip.
In Europe that went to war in Iraq over the issue of WMD are like, you know what, we're not persuaded. And they should be allowed to be not persuaded, in my opinion, without the president, going completely berserk as he's done. Because I don't think that helps persuade anybody to help in the way that I think you reasonably put out a sort of narrative here that, yes, of course, all the countries have a vested interest in the Strait being reopened, ought to be working together to do it. But it is quite hard when the guy that started the war but led to it being shut is just trashing you all the time. Professor Zhang, let me bring you back into the debate here. Welcome back to Uncensored. We always get a great reaction when you come on. So thank you for sparing me some of your valuable time. Stephen mentioned there China and why China isn't doing more to help. It is interesting because China really gets more energy through the Strait than anybody else in the world, and therefore has a bigger vested interest, you would think, in getting it reopened as soon as possible. Why is China kind of sitting this out?
Well, China is not sitting this out. We have the ceasefire in place because China did a lot of backdoor diplomacy in order to pressure the Iranians to attempt a ceasefire. This is out of character for China. China does not like to involve itself in other nations' affairs. And so I think without Chinese pressure, we would not have the IRGC agreeing to the ceasefire in the first place. The issue is that the United States continues to be unreasonable in negotiations with the Iranians. The Iranians have done a lot in order to try to accommodate the Americans. But, when J.D. Vance went to Pakistan for the first time to negotiate with the Iranians, basically, it was a very heavy-handed ultimatum to the Iranians. And after that, I think that the Iranians recognized that there really is no hope in negotiating with the Americans. The Americans want to escalate. Why the Americans want to escalate, we don't know, but we can expect that over the next few weeks, the escalation will increase. Trump has talked about using U.S. naval ships to escort oil tankers through the Strait of Hormuz. This is clearly a provocation, and we might have a Gulf of Tonkin incident, which will allow Trump to justify a ground invasion.
Right, and a ground invasion, Steve Keen, would be, to me, just pouring fuel onto what is already a burning fire of mayhem over there, which I think could be horrendous for the United States.
Absolutely. And I think the soldiers on the ships are having much the same reactions. We don't know whether the nuclear aircraft carriers taken out by Iranian attacks or by sailors stuffing their own clothing into the sewerage system to block it and force it out of the conflict. Those are our two choices. You have probably the least willing American military in the history of America's military incursions, supposed to go up against a country of 90 million people who know they face an existential risk. It's absolutely ludicrous to be talking about ground troops going into that part of the world. And I've had, I'm not an expert in military matters either. We've all acknowledged that. But from what I've got from reports of people who I know are experts in that area, unless the Americans have Star Wars style weapons to use against the Iranians, and this is going to be a slaughter of those American troops. And then I completely agree. This has probably been set up as another false flag, which America should be famous for. The Gulf of Tonkin, which dragged them into the Vietnam conflict in the first place, was put across as an attack by American ships in international waters. It was actually an American attack within Vietnamese waters. All this stuff, America sets up these wars and then loses them.
You've described Donald Trump as an anarchist who behaves like a mafia boss with no idea of consequences. And you've sent this message to world leaders: get rid of Trump, stop this. America has to concede defeat and step back to give us a chance to rebuild the world's physical infrastructure before global famine sets in. You added, it's a clusterfuck coming out of America. If you're going to see regime change to stop this war, forget about seeing it in Iran. You need to see it in America. I mean, that's strong rhetorical stuff there. Just explain what you're getting at.
Well, look, first of all, I mean, my perspective on Trump comes from having a personal relationship with somebody with narcissistic personality disorder. And everything, I think the one advantage of that relationship in the long term was I understood Donald Trump, I think. And that is that he simply wants to make himself the center of attention. And it doesn't matter how you do it. You make a center of attention by giving a nice dance or by invading another country. He just wants to be the center of attention. I think that's why he fell for Netanyahu's provocation, which 40 years of previous American presidents have resisted, and went in the belief that it would be over in a couple of days. I mean, all the talk about, we've got to get Iran to be reasonable, the Iranian regime, yada, yada, yada. The very first thing the Americans did was assassinate the top leadership of the country, including the father and I believe the wife of the new leader. You want to be taken seriously as somebody to negotiate with? That just tells you don't negotiate, defeat them on the ground. And just like Vietnam was a war where they brought in enormous firepower and lost to a guerrilla army, this is bringing in enormous firepower and taking against a political system which has broken itself into 31 like heads of a hydra so that you can't take it out collectively. So all America's tactics have backfired so far. They'll continue backfiring. The only way out is for Donald Trump to declare victory while conceding defeat.
Stephen Moore, I mean, look, I can't imagine a scenario where Donald Trump tries to get out of this without at least presenting a case for total victory. That's his nature. But in terms of this war and the impact it's had on his legacy, how was the tariff war doing before all this? In other words, the Trumponomics, which he launched with a huge gusto, a kind of year ago, how was that playing out, do you think, globally before this? In other words, was his economic strategy, do you think, working? And has this put everything back? Or was it not really working, and this has added to the general sense of chaos?
Well, first of all, I just have to say, I mean, come on. It seems like you all can't determine who's the good guy here and here's the evil. And by the way, I'm not even a big fan. You're the bad guys, for God's sake. Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's my point. If you actually think that we're the bad guys and the Iranians, the good guys, you have a personality disorder, my friend. I'm sorry. And it really is amazing that you think that we're the villains here and that this is a regime And by the way, again, I wasn't even necessarily in favor of this incursion in the first place. But come on, this is a regime that was killing thousands, murdering their own people. This was a regime that's building a nuclear weapon. So how are we the bad guys by trying to save lives? And I do think, look, I think to Trump's credit, he did view this as a humanitarian mission to save lives that were being slaughtered. Now, in terms of our economy, look, we've had now 5.5 years of Trump's presidency with an incredibly strong economy. Trumponomics has worked. If it hadn't been for COVID, Trump would have been reelected with a 40-state reelection landslide. The economy was very strong going into 2026. And it's true that the Iran situation has really changed that picture dramatically, which is why Trump really needs to bring this to an end as quickly as possible. But by the way, I'm not just attacking Steve. I think there are a lot of foreign leaders too who can't seem to figure out who's the good guy and who's the bad guy here. That's very troubling to Americans.
I was facing being conscripted to fight for freedom in Vietnam. And the one thing that threw me is, why am I being conscripted to fight for freedom? Okay, you go into Vietnam, you attack it, your whole thing is about going to stop the communist invasion of Southeast Asia. Who was the first country Vietnam has a war with? China, the first and last war. That turned out completely against what you thought was going to happen. Afghanistan, Iraq.
I was against all those things.
You should be against this one as well. Grow up. Okay, if you can't realize that America is the evil empire here, then you've...
It's the United States. You're saying the United States is the evil empire.
Yes, the United States began this. What country has invaded America? How many countries has America invaded? Please, stop reading Hollywood scripts and realize which planet you're on.
I seem to think that 9/11 was an attack on America. Maybe you don't agree with that, but...
Yes, okay, that's which country I said before.
Oops, you forgot about that one, right?
No, I didn't forget. I said country, and no country did that. That was a rogue, and the rogues came from Saudi Arabia, not from the bloody country you raided and the results of it. You guys have got a Hollywood version of your own history. It's a joke from the outside. Nobody takes you seriously anymore.
Before the evil empire, why is it every immigrant in the world wants to come to the United States?
Let's break this down moment by moment. Because what we just witnessed from Trump apologist Stephen Moore is the absolute pinnacle of right-wing bad faith gaslighting. When cornered by the hard strategic reality of this conflict, Moore didn't offer facts, strategy, or accountability. Instead, he pulled out the oldest, cheapest trick in the billionaire media playbook: standard issue, flags, and anthems, tribalism. He sat there and claimed Donald Trump viewed a military escalation that is actively killing civilians and trapping Western forces as a humanitarian mission. The sheer, unadulterated delusion it takes to call a reckless, unprovoked escalation a humanitarian mission is breathtaking. But Steve Keen and Professor Jiang laid out the cold, hard truths that the right-wing establishment is desperate to hide from working-class people. The hydra reality. Professor Jiang and Steve Keen exposed why the entire decapitation strategy, favored by Trump and the chicken hawks, has completely backfired. Iran's political and military architecture isn't a fragile house of cards. It's a decentralized, 3-1-headed hydra specifically engineered over 40 years to survive leadership strikes. Trump thought he could play the big man, assassinate the leadership, and force a capitulation. Instead, he triggered a harder-line succession, unified their military apparatus, and left Western forces exposed. The Gulf of Tonkin trap, Professor Jiang called out the extreme danger of Trump's naval escort operations in the Strait of Hormuz. This is a structural mirror to the 1964 Gulf of Tonkin incident, an ambiguous, manufactured flashpoint in contested waters used to lie the public into the Vietnam War. The right-wing populists need an incident to justify a ground invasion because their entire geopolitical posture is collapsing. A military of the unwilling. Keen dropped the heaviest truth bomb of the entire segment. This is the least willing military force in modern history. Working-class soldiers on nuclear aircraft carriers aren't buying the Hollywood script anymore. They know they are being used as pawns for a billionaire-backed culture war regime that slashes veteran care at home while manufacturing meat grinder quagmires abroad. Pitting an unwilling, overstretched force against 90 million people defending their homeland isn't foreign policy, it's a state-sanctioned slaughter. When Stephen Moore screamed, "If America is the evil empire, why does every immigrant want to come here?" he showed just how bankrupt the right-wing narrative truly is. He invoked decades-old soft power to justify modern, thuggish, billionaire-driven imperialism, as Keane rightly shot back, "Nobody wants to go there now, mate." The soft power of the West is being incinerated on live television. The only sane exit from this catastrophe is for Trump to find a way to declare total victory while quietly conceding defeat, coining a narrative his base will swallow, so the world can step back from the brink of global economic collapse and mass famine. But that requires an ego capable of strategic retreat, and right now, the narcissistic authoritarian populism driving the White House is incapable of it. The corporate right wants a permanent culture war to distract from economic failure at home, even if the price is paid in the blood of working-class soldiers and innocent families. We cannot let them control the narrative. If you made it to the end, hit like and subscribe. It really helps the channel. Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I'll catch you in the next one.